Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. Today, we are continuing our ongoing coverage of the war between the Russian Federation and Ukraine. So, as I peruse the headlines around the world, it appears that we are one step closer to a third world war. Article now I'll read to you. NATO will not be sending troops to Ukraine despite some European countries considering such actions, Stoltenberg said. NATO allies are providing unprecedented support to Ukraine, Stoltenberg said. We have done that since 2014 and stepped up after the full-scale invasion, but there are no plans for NATO combat troops on the ground in Ukraine. But wait. There's more. Several NATO and EU member states are considering the possibility of deploying their troops to Ukraine as part of a bilateral agreement, said Slovak Prime Minister Robert Fico. French President Macron has not ruled out the possibility of sending troops to Ukraine. So look, if the French would like to go fight the Russians, then by all means, let the French go fight the Russians. Let them go do it. Have at it, France. You can conscript all the illegal Muslims that have saturated your nation state. You may be able to liberate Paris in the south of France by sending some of those Muslims to fight in Ukraine. But that's not going to happen. The Muslims will be at home taking care of the average French conscripts, children, and wives. Absolutely. So, yes, is it possible that we are now seeing the ramifications of the collapse of the Ukrainian military? Is this why we are now seeing the narrative change to the possibility that certain EU nation states, not NATO, other EU nation states, will be deploying forces to assist the Ukrainians? Yeah, I think so. I think we are seeing the result of the Russian strategy. The Russian strategy is right now designed to essentially kill the Ukrainian military, to bleed it dry, and then at a certain point, the Russians believe, as do European Western powers believe, that eventually we will see a collapse, a general collapse of the Ukrainian armed forces, resulting in a very rapid Russian advance. Now, we're already seeing that take place within the vicinity of Avdiivka. We are continuing to see this Russian steamroller move in a westerly direction in the area near Avdiivka. And just a real quick update just to see what has happened, just how quickly now this is collapsing for the Ukrainian military. And this is just a few days, going back to the 20th. Fast forwarding it now, 22nd, 24th, 25th, and 26th. And keep in mind, this is a Ukrainian-supported mapping service. This mapping service tends to be much more a proponent of the Ukrainians retaining territory. But I still use it. It's a a fairly effective map, and eventually it updates, maybe not as rapidly as some other maps. But I would not want to be accused of using a pro-Russian mapping service. But that's where it sits right now. Now, there is additional talk and additional discussion about what is going to happen in spring, summer, late summer. There is continued talk that the Russians are preparing for large-scale offensive operations, even larger in scope than what we're seeing right now in and around Avdiivka. So the thought is that May, June, July, we could see a very large Russian offensive operation directed at varying points along the front line, to include Zaporizhia, Orikhiv, Volhodar. Obviously, the frontal operations will continue running from the Donetsk region and Avdiivka all the way to the north towards Kramatorsk and Sloviansk, and then finally an offensive operation near Kupiansk as well. We would also say we do not rule out the eventual Russian objective of capturing Kharkov. At this point, I don't see how it is possible that the Russians were to accept a peace agreement and Kharkov is not part of that agreement. Now, I have discussed this before, where I had stated that the likelihood of a large-scale Russian offensive that would achieve a breakthrough and see the Russians moving towards Odessa is highly unlikely. I still believe that to be the case. Now, here's the caveat to that. If we see, or we were to see, a general collapse of the Ukrainian military, and this is where the Ukrainian military loses all cohesion and quits fighting as a unified military force. And again, I think that's what the French concern is. That is what the concern in the United Kingdom and some other nation states, that we are starting to reach that point. We're starting to get closer to the point where the Russians start to just simply steamroll the Ukrainians. And look, we have seen this before. We watched this in past history. We saw this in World War II. Now, while this is not on the same scale as World War II, you have to compare and contrast, because many of the same strategies that the Russians are using, again, it's far superior military industrial facilities, that capability, its larger pool of manpower. That is what we are seeing get bigger and bigger each day, every day. Now, is it possible that if we were to see the general frontline collapse of the Ukrainian military, could we see Russian forces moving towards Odessa again? Possibly. I think there would also be some internal issues happening in Ukraine as well, meaning large-scale protests against the government, demanding an end to the war. There would be other factors involved in a Russian move towards Odessa. But if you listen to the rhetoric of some Russian leaders, the Russians, at least on the surface, in terms of what they are telegraphing, they appear to be preparing their population, the Russian population, for an expanded conflict. They are openly talking and discussing the prospect of war with Western nation states, i.e. the NATO alliance. That is being openly discussed. No one here in the United States for a minute believes that a third world war is going to occur. And that's what it concerns me, is the ignorance is bliss mentality we see from the Democrats and the political left here in the United States. And it's unfortunate because the people here in the United States are living in what I call societal apogee. We have hit the apogee of civilization in terms of laziness, in terms of whatever you want is quite literally at your fingertips. The average middle-class American teenager, fighting age male, Gen Z, millennial, what have you, simply has to pick up a smartphone and within a matter of minutes can have food, can have whatever he wants, whatever his heart desires, delivered to his house in a matter of minutes. The level of societal decay that is happening, and I've talked about this before with the transgender issue and movement that is happening here in the U.S., that is part of that debauchery. And the United States is not ready for a third world war. The society is not ready. And I have to say that as Macron thinks and talks about the possibility of sending French forces to fight in Ukraine, French society is not ready as well. It has grown soft. It also has hit apogee. And I have to think, at the start of the fall of the Roman Empire, was some older Roman looking at what was happening around him and asking the same questions. And I have to believe that was the case. And I believe I am that person. And we are those persons that are looking around and asking the same questions. We are at apogee. We are seeing what we are seeing. Are we ready for what's to come next? And I don't think we are. We have an alliance now, a military alliance that has become much stronger in the form of Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, Venezuela, Cuba, other nation states. That is a very powerful alliance that if this turns into an all-out World War military conflict, that is going to be a very difficult alliance for the West to defeat. Now, as I just mentioned, some of those nation states, North Korea, for instance, North Korean military factories were operating between 20 and 30% efficiency at the start of the Ukrainian-Russian war. That has now reached a level with certain factories in North Korea now reaching back to 100% production capacity. And obviously, we believe those factories, such as factories that produce 152 millimeter artillery rounds, ballistic missiles, are in fact helping the Russians with those munitions. The North Koreans, with the assistance of the Russians and the Chinese, can produce massive amounts of armaments. And that's what we're seeing happen. So that's kind of where we set for today. Again, we're watching what is happening in Avdiivka, west of Avdiivka, very closely. This is very disconcerting for the Ukrainian military. And again, we very well could be on the precipice of a general collapse of the Ukrainian armed forces as we continue to watch this war. And that's why we're seeing the rhetoric that we are seeing now coming out of France. Is this the beginning of the end? Difficult to say. But stay tuned. We'll continue our coverage. As always, thanks for joining us. More to come. Have a good day.